The concept of the orchestral tone poem or symphonic poem was a natural product of the 19th century Romantic era. Music was now moving beyond its traditional form and function. Now it's a means of expressing oneself, things and ideas, picturesque representations of nature, literary and historical events, and the concept really took off when Franz Liszt got a hold of it. And Liszt's list of 13 tone poems shows a composer who was not a traditional Liszt, rather sentimental Liszt, perhaps a bit sensationalist, in some ways even transcendental Liszt. I could go on, but I won't, because we're going to look at a tone poem by Franz Liszt's successor in the genre, Richard Strauss, one of history's most purely brilliant composers, who could not resist what Liszt had missed. No. This is not the Viennese Strausses who wrote all the waltzes. This is Richard Strauss, who was Bavarian, who adopted the tone poem format, and he turned it into a sensational, virtuosic form of musical display piece that no one had imagined possible. So Strauss became the leading exponent of the late 19th century music of the future, and thus the true heir of Richard Wagner. So from 1888, when he was 24 years old, to 1915, Strauss composed 9 tone poems, to which a few other works might be added, but generally it's 9. And it's the 4th of them, Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks from 1895, that we will focus on. Till Eulenspiegel was a sort of folk hero from 14th century Germany, a wheelie, wascally guy who goes around exposing vice and corruption in the government and church by playing outrageous pranks and practical jokes, often of a low-down, scatological nature. In fact, his name Eulenspiegel, the owl mirror, may be a sanitized version of a more unsavory name. But according to legend, Eulenspiegel died in the plague, a much less sensational demise than the one Strauss gives him, as you will hear. Anyway, Strauss uses this story to create a 15-minute tone poem that totally redefined what a modern orchestra could do, both in terms of the technical demands on the instruments and the complex rhythmic patterns, the combination of which still astounds us today. Strauss refers to this work as a rondo, which implies both a legendary folk ballad as well as the structural form known as the rondo, which we've dealt with in another episode. And in fact, the main A material, the 2 themes that represent Till, occur repeatedly, usually separated by contrasting musical episodes, which in a rondo would be the B, C, and D material, but which also serve here to illustrate Till's wild and crazy adventures. One thing that is so fascinating about Strauss is the amazing way that he constructs the music by using leitmotifs that represent characters or objects or ideas in the story. And nobody, believe me, nobody could work his musical motifs as imaginatively as Strauss did. Okay? In the very beginning, we hear these 4 notes played gently by the violins. You could put the German words to this. I bet Strauss did. Es war einmal, literally, there once was, or once upon a time. Now you add 2 more notes to this figure. Okay, so we have 6 notes. And right there, you have about 40% of the material that Strauss would need for this entire 15-minute work. Okay? And so this is the first of 2 melodic cells or motifs that represent Till Eulenspiegel. The other is this. And this is a very common melodic progression here in F major. Or if you take it into D major, you can do a very famous symphony by Shostakovich. But we'll stay in F major, okay? And Strauss adds this one chromatic passing tone. This one, which gives the motive a sly, sort of teasing character. And this is the second of the 2 motifs upon which this entire work is built, okay? So these 5 notes form the beginning of this well-known melody. very lively and clever music. But there are a few things that I want to point out about it. Number one, it's fine to play this tune on the piano, and that last part is perfectly idiomatic for two hands on a keyboard. I can even play it with my eyes closed. Okay. But it's perfectly impossible to play this on a French horn, that most touchy and unpredictable of instruments. But that's the instrument to which Strauss assigns this melody, which hops and skips around, and then it tumbles all the way down from the top register of the horn down to its lowest extreme. But of course, it was done. Players figured out a way to do it. And for the past 100 years, this solo passage is on every horn audition list in the world. Strauss created the standard in 1895 that still exists today. The second thing I want to point out about this melody is its startling rhythmic construction. As if the technical demands on the horn players weren't enough, Strauss frames this tune in the most complex rhythmic pattern possible. I will try to demonstrate it. Most all of Till Eulenspiegel is written in a 6/8 meter. That is, there are 6 quick eighth notes in each measure. And we know this pattern very well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Very easy. And 6/8, very, very common meter throughout musical history. Speed it up a bit, take it into D major, and you have a Gigue by Bach. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, that quickly. Or a symphonic finale by Haydn. Or a string quartet by Beethoven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 6, 1. Or speed it up again, and you have a famous aria by Rossini. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. In each of these examples, you can hear the steady pulse of 2 larger beats. Bum, 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 no matter what the tempo is, no matter how fast. Boom. Each of these beats is then divided into 3 little eighth notes. Bump, 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 for a total of 6 quick eighth notes per measure, hence 6/8 meter. Okay? Well, Strauss's use of the 6/8 meter in Till Eulenspiegel is so complex and irregular that musicians today are still trying to figure it out to the point where it really feels natural. So, to assist me, I have a metronome, battery operated. We will set it to a regular pulse of 92 beats per minute. This is just like the second hand on your clock. If you set this to 60, you'll get exactly what the second hand does. Here's 92. Okay. Okay. So now we're in a 6/8 meter, and the rhythm of the 6/8 would fall into 2 clearly audible larger beats. 1, 2, 1, right? 2. You can hear it for yourselves. Then you divide each of these into 3 eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now let's take Strauss's special horn melody. We'll keep the steady beat going. And here's how Strauss fits this bizarre melody into a normal, steady 6/8 beat. 1, 2, 3, and. And you hear at the very end there, it almost settles into a regular beat pattern. But up until that point, it's anything but regular. It is very complicated. I'll play it again, and listen here how the melody falls on the keyboard. This is what the French horn is playing, as opposed to the steady beat of the metronome. This is what the conductor would be showing. Okay, here we go. And but that's the essence, that's the character of Till Eulenspiegel. Mischievous, unpredictable, frustrating, annoying, outrageous, perfectly captured by Strauss in this theme. And in addition to everything else, the theme speeds up. Strauss marks this passage allmählich lebhafter, gradually more lively as it goes. And now we will add the French horn. And And so, as Strauss begins to build tension and excitement with this unusual theme, we get this in the clarinets. One, and this in the bassoons and low strings in response. 1, 2. Which continues to ascend like so. And you hear it finally locks into a regular rhythm at the end of this passage. Believe me, conductors pray for that moment when they finally feel some security in holding things together. And a moment later, we hear a funny little march. Now the march repeats, and the French horns blurt out this bizarre rhythmic figure. I'll play the horns, I'll sing the march. Did you recognize them? That's the 6-note motive with which the piece opens, in little pieces, kind of punching its way through this march. Okay, all right, stop. Just knock it. It's just so annoying. My goodness. So why is Strauss doing this to the distinguished gentlemen of the orchestral profession in 1895? Was he trying to frustrate them? Was he trying to incite a riot? Well, I think that, like Till Eulenspiegel himself, Strauss was having a great time at being outrageous and inventive. And speaking of outrageous, at the end of that big build-up we were talking about, we get ta-da! Ta-da! Ladies and gentlemen, and here he is. The little E-flat clarinet, the clarinet with the bright sound, impudently pipes up with this. Well, that sounds to me, it has to be our first 6 notes. You know, the serene Once Upon a Time, yes, which now sounds like a totally different creature due to Strauss's brilliant transformation of those 6 notes. Okay, and in fact, this does represent Till Eulenspiegel himself. And there's that funky chord which we will hear often as we go on. And this piece is barely a minute old at this point. And as Strauss proceeds now to introduce us to the character, the new impudent version of the 6 notes is darting in and out of the texture. And when we finally get a full statement of the tune in the woodwinds and strings, Strauss couples that with this second motive, the horn motive, like a big fanfare, under which the strings are scurrying about with, recognize it? It's the 6 notes, okay? Then Strauss continues with this horn theme as fanfare, like so. And the strings scurry about again, which you never hear in the performance because the brass are supposed to be playing loud. Now, Strauss continues to spin out all of this material in a relaxed and grazioso manner, with the motive and the descending horn passage now linked together, like so, in the flute. And here it is now in the orchestra. Try to count the number of times that you hear the motive flitting about this graceful string melody. And now another rhythmic trick as Strauss compresses the motive, like so. Now try to keep track of it. Well, there, you heard those funky harmonies in the woodwinds, those chords that I pointed out before, that one and this. Okay, this will return, but things finally resolve in an easy-to-hear cadence. That was the clarinet, okay? And you could say that the first major section, the A material of this rondo, has just concluded. And now things have calmed down. They're rather hushed, and you sense a thrill in the air. And the cello and bass, they play Till's first theme, the 6 notes, okay? But they're broken up into little 2-note groups. And the flute and violins echo. You just know something big is about to happen. All right. And since Strauss's imagination is almost out of control, his title character now follows. Okay? And without warning, this joker decides to ride his horse through a crowded marketplace, and it gives Strauss an opportunity for some wild orchestral antics. First, bass clarinet on a low D, just out of nowhere, zooms up the scale. A huge cymbal crash. The orchestra shrieks in horror. The trumpets use the flutter tongue sound. It's a big wooden ratchet in the percussion section, and the strings underneath punch out the first motive. Here it is. And you may have caught the first 2 notes of the motive, all out of kilter in the low instruments. The 3-note version of the motive, ba-da-dum, 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 is Till's horse rearing up in the woodwinds, chickens, ducks flying all over. There's total chaos, okay? After this shocking episode, the scene suddenly changes. Another rondo episode which represents Till Eulenspiegel disguised as a monk, chanting and processing with him. Dark, creepy music. Again, it's very tricky rhythmically with the first 3 notes of the theme. Okay, now muttering away in the bassoons. But after so much wild, disjointed music, Strauss knows that we need a breather. So does the orchestra. Okay. So he gives us a lovely interlude, the more genteel nature of Till, perhaps, and the one passage in the work that really evokes an old-world folk-like rustic atmosphere. And Strauss writes a new melody here, but be on the lookout for the opening motive lurking somewhere, maybe in the bass. Did you catch it there in the low instruments? There's the main 6 notes. Then it became the actual melody. Now here it is in its fast version. Strauss' never-ending imagination as to how he used his motives. And here it seems that our hero has fallen in love. The solo violin now takes this familiar motive, rather coy and flirtatious, and the chromatic brass suggests that Till is smitten, even intoxicated with love. And the solo violin's plummeting chromatic scale tells us that Till is indeed teetering, ready to take the plunge with some young maiden. And now you'll hear how Strauss gradually changes the tone from gentle and caressing to a much darker character, as apparently the affair has gone south, okay? And the formerly genial horn melody has become rather moody. And Strauss now works this version of the melody into a real tempest. And now he takes the opening motive and he lengthens each of these notes, harmonizing each one so that we get this very threatening and stern march. And you'll hear the furious descending scales in the woodwinds. It is obvious that Till is raging. Poor guy is really taking it hard. But he shakes it off and immediately throws himself back into his work. And another adventure and rondo section begins. Ladies and gentlemen, Till Eulenspiegel, now disguised as a university professor, is engaged in a serious philosophical discussion with his pompous, learned colleagues. And they are pompous. The bassoons, the bass clarinet, and contrabassoon mutter and harumph with this march tune. It's answered by interjections from the mysterious Herr Dr. Eulenspiegel, a new version, of course, of his theme. But this is a serious discussion, so we're in the minor key, and it's rhythmically rather flippant. So here is the solemn discourse, Till Eulenspiegel and Professors Feinstein, Frankfurter, and von Stupor. And you heard Till's theme there, the horn theme, in this crazy new rhythm. But our hero is having a grand time with this charade. So Strauss takes this new version of the theme and he overlaps it in the woodwinds, going higher and higher. You swear that you can hear the orchestra snickering. And as we get caught up in Strauss's dazzling music and its tone painting, stop for a moment, step back, and realize that he is continually transforming his little musical cells and into a fantastic array of new variations to drive the narrative ahead and to build and define the structure of the work and to dazzle the listener, of course. So this argument now resumes, becoming more heated. The professor's march becomes almost violent, with rising scales in the strings and pounding drums, at the height of which Till Eulenspiegel shrieks at them his theme. And that chord that I've been mentioning, that funky one, well, things have gotten so intense now that all of the higher instruments, the muted brass and the trilling woodwinds and the strings, transform these two chords into a mocking, shrill laughter as Till rips off his faculty robes. And there he goes, dashing off, blowing kisses to the stunned professors. I mean, what else could this possibly be? Strauss's music is so vivid that you can just see this action in your mind. Well, the picturesque episodes are now over, except for one, and Strauss now gives us a little relaxation, sort of a breezy meditation or a summation on the quality of humor, perhaps. He writes now in a slower 6/8 meter, bum, 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 which now sounds like a leisurely swaying waltz. And as you might expect, it's all based on new transformations of our two familiar themes. Till's horn melody becomes the florid tune that you just heard, which is answered by the first motive. But now it's in a new key. Amazing. Strauss just never ran out of new, fascinating ways to use his material. And Strauss now begins his final ascent, as it were, in the legend of Till Eulenspiegel. Ultimately, we arrive at a majestic fanfare tune in the brass, which, of course, is a new version of the horn theme. But what makes this passage so thrilling is the rushing and the swirling strings and woodwinds above the brass, all based, of course, on... And here it is. I love that big chord at the high point of this phrase. Here. Whoa. It's an F sharp diminished seventh chord over B flat. Wow. And when it seems that Strauss can go no further in terms of sheer frenetic energy, he actually does. All right, by taking Till's theme into a new version, then extending it like so, and going berserk with it, hammering away in the most harmonically dense passage in this score, which rises bit by bit by bit and finally explodes in a blaze of glory in a new key, D major, with this. This melody happens to be something that we heard long time ago, that lovely rustic tune way back near the beginning, this. When Till had settled down for a moment, so gorgeous, but it's back and in a major way. Something's wrong. Yes, the law has caught up with our nutty friend, and he's been drummed into court, literally. And percussionists usually use multiple tenor drums here for this passage. And the stern judges are bearing down on Till for his indiscretions. And in between their harsh proclamations, Till, rather bored by it all, says, and Strauss writes in the score here, gleichgültig, that is, indifferently, like Till is saying, yeah, whatever. But the judges are not impressed. And now Till objects, but I'm afraid it's all over but the hanging, which comes in the very highest register of the E-flat clarinet, as close an approximation of strangulation in music that you will ever care to hear. And sad to say, our little buddy is no more. And the epilogue. Ah, yes, the epilogue. Once upon a time. And we get an actual cadence. Wow. Very wistful now. And as the opening motive is gradually reduced to just 3 notes, dying away in the bass clarinet, like so, we hear a solemn, radiant chord in the strings and winds that seems to tell us that our departed hero must now be Saint Eulenspiegel, somewhere up there, maybe, looking down. I don't know, maybe looking up, who knows. But Strauss gives the old boy the last laugh. As if to say, at all costs, never let your sense of humor die. What's really stunning to learn about Richard Strauss in light of his brazen, astounding talent is that he was a modest and practical and self-effacing man. It's true he did write a number of big works about himself and his family, but there's always an undercurrent of humor and a gentle self-parody about them, okay? And with Till, there's always the possibility that Strauss was also writing about himself here in this work, at the height of his creative powers, youthful, brash, audacious, tweaking, shocking, and mocking the old world musical establishment with this, his wildest, most wicked, virtuosic orchestral piece to date. Till Eulenspiegel may indeed be Richard Strauss's greatest accomplishment as a composer, and that's saying a lot. And how did he look upon it? Well, ever the realist, the practical workman, Strauss years later was asked if he realized that Till Eulenspiegel had reached, quote, the metaphysical limits of profound humor. Strauss replied, really? All I tried to do was give the audience a good laugh for a change. I'm Lawrence Rapchak. Thank you very much for watching and listening.